Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for Road Safety Plans, a framework for moving from intent to action. Joining us today are Rosemarie Anderson and Hillary Isebrands from the Federal Highway Administration. I'm Amy Luft, Compass's Communication Coordinator. Compass strives to reach out to all residents of Ada and Canyon counties. Please help us to track how well we are doing by participating in the poll that I will launch in just a moment on your screen. Responses are anonymous and your participation is completely voluntary, but we do appreciate your help. Improving transportation is really at the forefront of transportation decision making, but to truly make a difference, we need to be able to move from intent to action. Today, Hillary Isebrands and Rosemarie Anderson will set the stage for developing local and regional road safety plans and provide tools and examples that we can use here locally in the Treasure Valley. Rosemarie is the Local and Rural Roads Manager in the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Safety. And Hillary is a Senior Roadway Safety Engineer and Team Lead with the Federal Highway Administration's Resource Center Safety and Design National Technical Service Team. First, a few housekeeping items before we start. For good sound quality, all participants have been muted. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box. And we'll pause for questions once during the presentation as well as at the end. This presentation has been approved for 1.5 AICP certification maintenance credits. While today's presentation is scheduled for 90 minutes, Rosemarie and Hillary have graciously offered to stay on the line for an additional 30 minutes at the end to address any more in-depth questions that you have. The presentation is also being recorded and will be available later on Compass's YouTube channel. Again, if you have not yet, please take a moment to complete the poll on your screen. And then Rosemarie, I will turn the mic over to you.
Okay, there we are. I now have a voice. Good morning, everyone. As Amy mentioned, I'm Rosemarie Anderson, and I am the Local and Rural Roads Program Manager in the Office of Safety at Federal Highway Administration's office. I'm going to go through a few slides talking about some of the things that we've done, talking about local road safety plan, and then Hillary Isebrands will take over in terms of going through the data analysis and the different steps within the process and talking about some tools that we do have to develop local road safety plans. Hillary, are you sharing the screen? I don't see it. We have a few slides that will be up in a minute. Can you put it on presentation mode? There we go. Is everyone seeing the slides now?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, next slide, please. So these are some disclaimers that we have at Federal Highway. We do not accept endorsement products, manufacturers. We do not endorse any products per se. I just like to go through those and then we move on to the next slide. If you talk about today's agenda, as I mentioned before, we were looking at it in terms of introduction to local road safety plan, talk about some new funding opportunities, which we are really excited about. And here we'll talk about the crash data and local road safety plans. We talk about some resources, and then we have a discussion at the end. And as Amy mentioned earlier, we'd be on the line for an additional 30 minutes. So if you have any burning questions that are not answered during that 90 minutes, we'll be available to answer those. So why do local road safety plans? Local roads have a fatality rate that is 3 times higher than the interstate highway system. And more than 75% of all roads are maintained by local agencies. And approximately 30 to 40% of the fatalities that are occur on locally owned and operated roadways. So we do need to have a plan in terms of how we're going to move forward in reducing those fatalities and serious injuries if we're going to try to get to zero, which is our mission at Federal Highway, and a number of states have adopted that vision, and local agencies also. So if we're going to get to that zero number, we definitely have to have a plan in terms of how we're going to be doing that. Next slide, please. So here are some history. Minnesota began a comprehensive county road safety planning program back in 2014. And that was completed all 87 counties in the state by 2014. They're on now to a second iteration of those plans. I'm seeing the poll results. Okay. So they're onto a new iteration now in terms of redoing those plans. They've implemented the plans that they did back in between 2010 and 2014. And now they're redoing those plans, looking for other ways where they can actually reduce fatalities and serious injuries on those county road networks as well. In 2013 and 2016, Federal Highway sponsored some local road safety plan peer exchanges. In 2013, we invited 6 states to participate in a 2-day peer exchange. And since then, all of those states have actually developed policy in developing local road safety plans for their counties as well. In 2016, we had a peer exchange in Ohio, where a number of states were also invited and local agencies were invited as well. And we've seen progress in terms of those who were invited in terms of those local road safety plans. In coordination with NACE, Federal Highway developed local road safety plans pilots, which started in 2018. And we have worked with a number of states and local agencies through that process. We're on to round 3 at the moment. And now we're focusing on in-state local road safety peer exchanges. We have a couple of them coming up for different states as well. Next slide, please. So this map kind of shows what states have evolved local road safety plans. Some of them have been evolved by local agencies. Federal Highway has sponsored a number of these. But there are some states like Washington, Minnesota, North Dakota, who have actually done local road safety plans for all the counties in their state through different processes. In Minnesota, they've actually done it through getting a contractor to do all of those. In Washington State, they've actually had the local agencies develop their local road safety plans on their own with the promise of using HSIP funds to implement the projects that comes out of those plans. And as you can see, there's a number of dots on these maps where we've actually either helped local agencies develop those plans, or we have local agencies have actually gone ahead and do it. And a number of these have also been done through the NACE Federal Highway sponsored pilot local road safety planning process. And that's moving forward as well. Next slide, please. So what is a local road safety plan? So local road safety plan, it provides a framework for identifying, analyzing, and prioritizing those roadway safety issues on our roadways that we can actually address through implementation or through countermeasures that address those issues that we have identified. It's locally focused on local roads. It's looking at those issues that are occurring on your local roads. A lot of times, we try to look at it in terms of the state's strategic highway safety planning process, where a lot of times it's focused more so on the state roadways, and the number of times it may or may not actually address what is happening on those local roads. But once we've done these local road safety plans, it's addressing exactly what's happening on those local roads. And we can address them in terms of the countermeasures that are available to address those issues that we find. So what we've seen in terms of local road safety planning is that in Minnesota, we've seen a 25% reduction in county road fatalities in Minnesota. We've seen 17% reduction in fatalities and serious injuries in Washington state. And also in Thurston County, Washington state, they experienced a 35% reduction in severe curb crashes. So in terms of implementing those local road safety plans, we've actually seen a lot of benefits to reducing fatalities and serious injuries on those local roads as well. Next slide, please. So the benefits of local road safety plan, and here we will talk about these also, is reduction in fatal and severe injuries. Because we're looking to partner with a number of folks in developing these plans, we see where we can develop those lasting partnerships, where we can actually use those partnerships to also implement the plan as well once we have it developed. Greater awareness of what's happening on the roadway in terms of roadway safety and also the risk, not just where the crashes are happening, but in areas where there can be potential crashes based on the infrastructure. Leveraging funding opportunities, different sources of funds we can use through the partners that are developed. Transparency in prioritizing and funding opportunities, advancing risk-based, data-driven, and systemic approach to improving safety on local roads. And Hillary will talk a little bit more about this in terms when she talks about the data. Incorporating safety in routine business. So getting your maintenance folks involved in the development process also helps. Getting those folks who does behavioral safety, not just infrastructure safety, also helps. And supporting the state safety goals also. Once we're developing our local road safety plans, we're looking at in terms of improving safety on our local roads. So what is happening is that the state goals will also benefit from our local road safety plan and our improvements that is implemented. Next slide, please. So there are a number of different ways folks have developed local road safety plans, but there are some common aspects of local road safety plans that are available. So establishing leadership. We need to have somebody who actually leads that process, so that they can get all the partners together, having everybody on a single playing field, analyzing data, safety data, determining the focus of those plans. What are some of the emphasis areas that we're looking at? There is our emphasis area pedestrian, is it intersections, is it roadway departure crashes? And identifying strategies that address these emphasis areas also. Determine available resources, and we have a number of resources at Federal Highway on our website, and Hillary will mention some of those later on. And prioritizing and implementing those strategies, because if we're not implementing those plans, we cannot realize the goals of reducing those fatalities and serious injuries. And we have to revisit the plans, update them. What are some of the new issues that are popping up? What are some of the old issues that were not addressed? How are we going to address them in the future? Next slide, please. So we have to consider implementation during local road safety plan development. Developing the plan alone will not reduce our fatalities and serious injuries on our roadways. And as we mentioned earlier, what we need to do is think about it when we are developing the plan. Who are our partners? Our partners, are we going to keep them consistent in terms of developing those plans? If we don't implement the plan, it's just a plan without any action. So we have to implement the plan to realize those reductions in fatalities. Next slide, please. So in thinking about it in terms of developing the plan, maintain buy-in and support. So once you get your partners together, you've got to keep them focused. Get their buy-in and their support. Identifying funding mechanisms. It not necessarily means it's just the engineering funding that's available. They may have some behavioral funding, 402 funds from the enforcement side. They may have from NHTSA funding, or the Governor's Highway Safety Office may have some funding in terms of education as well. They may even have some materials that you can use in terms of implementing those plans. And determine your project delivery methods. How are you going to be delivering those projects? How are you going to go? What are some priorities that you need to think about in terms of moving forward? What are some of the effectiveness factors of those projects that you are moving forward? And continue communication and coordination with all the partners within that process. Next slide, please. So here are some opportunities. Now, the bipartisan infrastructure law, I've provided additional funding for the HSIP program. And this program is a program which actually addresses fatal serious injuries and safety on all public roads. So there's additional funding for HSIP program under this law. And all roadways are eligible, including those local roads within your jurisdiction, are eligible to access these funds. Next slide, please. So the bipartisan law also talks about complete streets. And what they talk, when they mention complete street, they define complete streets as making the roadway safe and usable for all users, making sure that all users are actually able to traverse those roadways safely. And the Compass MPO has actually recently completed their policy on complete streets, and it's a complete network policy that they have completed now. And I'll talk a little bit more about the funding part of this complete streets and the bipartisan infrastructure law in another slide later on. Next slide, please. So we've also had a number of different tools and resources for complete streets that are available on our website. I'm not sure if you're seeing the link on the bottom of the slide, because I'm not seeing it because it's cut off by my computer. But these slides will be available, so you have the link. So there's a public-facing web portal which have a number of resources for complete streets. Also, so these are available to implement your complete streets policy. If you're a local jurisdiction, there's a number of resources here available in terms of how you can actually design your streets so that you're able to get everyone traveling safely on those roads. Next slide, please. So there are new funding options under the new bill as well. And this is a Safe Streets and Roads for All, which is a discretionary funding program where eligible entities are tribes, MPOs, local agencies, and it's a $5 billion funding stream where 40% of that funding actually is available for planning purposes. So it's $1 billion a year, which 40% is available for planning purposes. So what is required to access these funds in terms of developing those to implement projects is you will have to have a plan. You have to have a comprehensive plan, which itemizes or looks at these projects. We're in the process now of developing the notice of opportunity, which we're talking about sending that out sometime in May. If you're interested in this program, there is a portal where you can sign up. It's Safe Streets, it's ss4a@dot.gov. You can sign up to get notification on when this is available. But these fundings are available. You're eligible to apply for these funding, whether you're a state, whether you're an MPO, a local agency, or a tribal agency, and the states are not eligible to apply for these funding. But there is funding available for planning as well as project implementation. But if you're going for the funds for project implementation, you have to have a comprehensive plan. Sorry. Thank you. So there's also the wildlife crossing pilot program, which also you're eligible for at the MPO or local agency level. The state DOT is also available for these, and if you're a regional planning authority, if you're a tribe, you're eligible for this wildlife crossing pilot program. There will be a set aside of 60% of this grant fund for rural areas. So if you're in a rural area, please consider looking for these funds as well. Next slide, please. And the rural surface transportation grants, even though it's not just for safety, it is also available and you're eligible for safety programs and projects as well, which may come out of your local road safety plan to access these funds for implementation as well. Next slide, please. And here we talk about, we had mentioned before, the complete street standards and policies. States and MPOs are required to carry out transportation planning activity. They're at least, for the states, at least 2.5% of their state planning and research funds should be going to complete streets activities, as well as 2.5 of the MPO funds should be going towards those complete streets activities. So these funds are eligible also for implementing some of your local road safety plan projects that come. So next slide, please. So when we talk about local road safety plans, we're looking at it from a data standpoint. Your local road safety plan needs to be data-based. And looking at Ada and Cannon, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's Ada, not Ada. And Cannon counties, which are within the MPO region, we see where there are a number of crashes that are happening, not just on the main arterials, but on different local roads as well. So you see that the majority of the crashes are happening on roads that are maintained by the local agencies. And when we look at it, we are seeing that there are not a lot of clusters that are happening. The different colors represent different years when these fatalities are happening. And we can see that they're scattered different places over different years as well. So that comes down to looking at it in terms of risk. And Hillary will talk a little bit more about risk and how we look at the safety data. Next slide, please. So again, this is showing that Ada and Cannon County are at the top 10 counties within Idaho. The graph just shows that there isn't any consistent movement. It goes up and down for both counties over the past 5 years in terms of fatalities and serious injuries. And we've seen where Ada has gone down between 2019 and 2020, whereas Cannon County have gone up a bit as well. Next slide, please. In terms of some efforts that we've done in Idaho, Idaho attended the 2016 peer exchange in Ohio. And there was the engineer from Napa region, which came to that peer exchange, and he actually developed an abbreviated, I will call it, local road safety plan at the time, where he basically just looked at the intersections within the region, and actually did some improvements to those intersections that were identified also. We did an in-state peer exchange in Idaho in 2017, where a number of local agencies were invited to attend, and we had invited a number of folks from outside of Idaho, from Washington, Minnesota, I think Nebraska, Iowa, who came in and talked about their process and processes and some of the advantage and benefits that they had gotten from developing those plans as well. And in 2021, a few months ago, we completed 4 county plans in Idaho, in Bonner, Bonnick, Cannon, and Twin Falls counties. We actually completed those plans as well. Next slide, please. So I'm going to, before I turn it over to Hillary to go in a little bit more detail, are there any questions?
Thank you, Rosemarie. We have one question for you in the chat about enforcement and asking about if we really got serious about law enforcement of traffic laws, how much of a difference does that help in increasing safety if we can to help us increase compliance?
Well, I think overall, we have to look at it holistically. We are not going to get there if we just do engineering alone. And we are not going to get there if we look at enforcement alone. So we have to look at it holistically. So we have to incorporate both the engineering, enforcement, and the educational aspects of it. So not just the physical, but also the behavioral aspects of engineering, of looking at safety. And that's where, when we talk about local road safety plans and getting all of those partners together, law enforcement should be a major part of that overall process, so that they can provide that input and feedback into that overall process in terms of moving forward and reducing fatalities and serious injuries as well.
Thank you. That is the only question I have for you at this time. I'll remind people, if you have questions for Hillary or for Rosemarie, put them in the chat. We can revisit again with Rosemarie after Hillary is done as well, in case you have additional questions for her. With that, I will say thank you, Rosemarie, and I believe we'll get over to Hillary now.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Rosemarie. It's a pleasure to be here today with you all. Before I start sharing my screen again, I just want to thank Rosemarie. What we'll do is she provided some great links to some resources for you all, as well as I am going to do that too. So Rosemarie might be able to populate some of those into the chat pod as I speak, but then at the very end, when we go into Q&A, we'll have an opportunity to put all those great links right into your chat pod. Again, we will also be providing Amy the full package of the slide deck that you'll be able to grab those resources as well. I know that that is sometimes the highlight of many of these workshops and webinars, is the resources that you guys are able to take home and utilize as you go forward. And I am going to do some demonstration as I go through the slides. I'm going to demonstrate local road safety plan do-it-yourself website, as well as actually dive into a newer resource that you have in Idaho, which is your interactive crash dashboard, and take a little bit deeper dive into that, in case some of you are not as familiar with the capabilities in terms of looking at data, because we really do believe that getting to zero is a data-driven process, and that's not only looking at crashes, but it's also looking at the risks that you have on your roadway. And you heard Rosemarie talk a little bit about that. So bear with me as I share my screen. I also am going to be doing some polling through Mentimeter. If you've never used Mentimeter before, I'm going to flash up a QR code, and you can go to mentimeter.com. And when we get to those polling questions, there's going to be a little number code that you're going to punch in, and then it'll bring you to our polling for today. So just sit tight. And when that comes up, I will prompt you to, again, you can use your phone with the QR code, or you can type it into your webpage, menti.com. So looking forward to the next hour here. All right, so share my screen. And here we go. So Amy, let me know if you're not seeing the opening slide for local road safety plans. If not, we will proceed. So developing a local road safety plan. So Rosemarie talked to you a little bit about kind of where we've been in terms of supporting local road safety plan implementation, development and implementation at federal highways over really the last decade. There's parallel efforts that are going on because, as we all know, there's lots of local agencies in terms of townships and cities and MPOs and regional planning or rural planning agencies across the country. And so it is important that we provide a way that is streamlined, a way that is efficient in terms of developing local road safety plans. And with the new legislation, there's new opportunities in front of us in terms of having more people develop local road safety plans, and more agencies develop local road safety plans to really drive down not only the fatalities and serious injuries, but really drive down the risk that you see on the roadway network. So at the end, I am going to do a demonstration of this local road safety plan do-it-yourself website. This was launched in the end of 2020. And it really was a culmination of the pilot programs that Rosemarie mentioned that we have been working on in federal highways with over 10 states and over 100 local agencies in terms of getting the resources there. So if folks are able to develop their own plan or are able to, in some cases, hire someone to help them develop a local road safety plan, that it was clear. We've simplified and clarified the process for developing that local road safety plan. And as Rosemarie mentioned, the implementation is the most important part in terms of getting projects on the ground, continuing that collaboration and coordination. We just had that question about law enforcement. That really is setting us up for success in terms of a little bit of a shift, probably in our safety culture, if you will, in terms of working together to develop a plan and implement solutions across all the E's. So Rosemarie shared, you saw this graphic in the slides that she shared, but really there's a video, a companion video that goes along with this. I can share that in the chat pod as well. But these are the steps really, is that Rosemarie talked about the champions, right? And so I'm hoping that all of you that are on the webinar today are really already champions for safety. And hopefully this will give you some additional ideas of how you can be a champion for safety, whether you are someone who lives in these communities that Compass serves, or those that work or volunteer for local agencies. It is really very important that this effort to get to zero is all of our responsibilities. And so it can be law enforcement, it's public health, it's emergency services, it's elected officials, it's the community. We talk about that data-driven element, so using that safety data, whether it's crashes, maintenance logs, safety audits that you may have done, and even traffic violations, all give us a piece of information to help us make these informed decisions on what we can prioritize first with the funds that we might have available. And we're going to talk a lot about proven safety countermeasures. That is a big part of implementation, is knowing what countermeasures or solutions are best fit for the issues that you have on your roadway system. So chevrons on curves, roundabouts at intersections, targeted enforcement, and high visibility crosswalks. And then ultimately it's that implementation that we continue to talk about. And that might be through education, enforcement, projects, engineering, and maintenance work, among other partnerships that we might have perhaps with public health and others in our communities, like school districts perhaps, or an employer, a large employer that you might have in your community that might be sitting at the table with you to try to improve safety for all users, pedestrians, bicyclists, people in automobiles. Perhaps you've got some freight that goes through your community. It's really important that at the end of the day, we're getting people home safely in your community. I like to say when my family leaves in the morning, I've got a 6th grader, a 9th grader, and my husband actually works for the county here in the community I live in Colorado. I want them coming home safely as well. I've got one that walks, I've got one that rides transit, and I've got one that drives. So that is all really important in terms of how you look at not only your family, in terms of your family coming home every day, but your community and the people that share your community, whether they're going through your community or they're coming to your community, perhaps to shop or to recreate. So just reiterating some of the elements that Rosemarie talked about earlier in terms of looking at why would a local agency create a local road safety plan? So really, ultimately, it's the safety of our roadways. It's reducing those fatal and severe crashes for all users. It's developing those lasting partnerships. And it's not that those relationships don't already exist. It's how could we enhance perhaps those relationships and increase the communication that we might have between law enforcement, EMS, education, engineering, and everyone else. And it's just a greater awareness of our road safety and the risks that we have. So when we do have funding, we are able to target the locations that have the highest risk. For example, curves, rural roadway, 2-lane rural roadway with curves with a radii of between 500 and 1,000, we know have a higher crash risk than curves with other radii, with a larger radii. We know intersections are planned conflict points. So how can we reduce the conflict points, reduce the speeds at an intersection? We want to leverage those funding opportunities, and not only the funding that you might have in your maintenance budget or in your capital improvement budget, but also opportunities through the state and through the federal government. And Rosemarie talked a little bit about these new opportunities that are coming forward in the new legislation. It also allows us to provide transparency in prioritization of funding the project. So if you really have that data-driven approach to your projects and to how you're using your dollars to improve safety on the roadway, it oftentimes allows us to be to say no sometimes to projects, because that perhaps is not showing, it is not indicative of maybe the highest risks that you might have on your roadway. So that prioritization through data-driven safety analysis and focusing on the areas where at higher risk really allows us to be transparent in terms of how we're prioritizing projects and funding. I've mentioned the data-driven components, and then of course, incorporating the safety throughout. If we only use safety dollars to invest in safety, we've got a long road to go. We know that every time we touch a project or touch one of our roadways, that's an opportunity to improve safety. Things that are very, very low cost, like removing vegetation from an intersection to allow good sight distance, all the way up to retroreflective borders around signal heads, and the list goes on, and we'll talk a little bit more about those countermeasures. I just wanted to plant the seed for what I'm going to demonstrate a little bit later. You already saw Rosemarie present some of the data from Ada and Canyon counties, but I'm going to dive a little bit deeper. You've got these resources at your fingertips in Idaho, which is tip my hat to ITD for the data that they are providing and sharing with the locals. So again, it's not all about, oh, well, I haven't gotten money from the state or from the federal government. It's what can I do with my own resources to advance safety in my community. And Rosemarie already mentioned the complete network policy, but this is also something that you guys have been working on in terms of looking at your goals and your objectives across the users on your network. And this is outstanding. This feeds right into what we are doing with the development of local road safety plans. So I've got a poll. So this is where you can take a deep breath. You can go to menti.com and you punch in 4677-7210. Perhaps Amy or Rosemarie or Hunter can help me by putting that in the chat pod. You can also use your phone with your camera to hit that QR code. Give me a moment. I'm going to jump out so we can live see the response to your questions. The question is, how many deaths occurred on your road network last year? All right, so here we go. I'm going to launch this. Move this out of the way. And here we go. Great. You guys are already populating our poll for today. So how many road deaths occurred on your road network last year? It's okay if you don't know. And if you are, someone, from the public, this would be, your town or your county or your community. This is really a great way to learn more about your roadway network and what is going on. And I focused here on the deaths, but again, oftentimes it's exponential in terms of the number of severe injuries and injuries that are incapacitating, as well as other types of injuries that we have on our roadway network. So about 16 of you have already entered the poll. You can see on the bottom right, I can take a look at that number 16 is about 16 of you have responded. And it's okay if you don't know the answer, you can just put in, I don't know, because that's part of the reason why we're here today, is to learn a little bit more about what's going on and opportunities for you to engage with each other in your agencies and within your community to help improve that safety. All right, so we'll take 5 more seconds for anyone else that wants to jump in there. I know this is the first poll, so if you can actually leave this up after on your screen or on your phone, and when we get to the next poll, it'll be a little bit quicker as we go into the polling. So again, think about it. Those are folks that did not come home when they left that morning. And that is what we need to take safety personally, because it is personal. The answer should be 0 when we talk about getting to 0, because I know it's 0 in my household. And I know it's 0 for my family members, as it should be for my community. All right, folks, thank you for doing the poll. Again, if you leave that up on your computer, on your phone, when we get to the next poll, we'll be able to jump into that pretty quickly. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here. This is a great video here. If you haven't seen it, we're not going to play any videos today, just to make sure that everything stays connected. I'll post this link in the chat pod afterwards, but this is an outstanding video from New South Wales in Australia. This was a real recording of an individual, and I actually have goosebumps right now just thinking about watching this video. It is important, and it reinforces the importance of it being personal in terms of how you look at the number of deaths in your community and what's an acceptable number. So really the vision, if we start talking about the vision and the mission and the goals of a local road safety plan, the goal hopefully is 0. And it's incremental sometimes when you look at, how we're going to drive those numbers down. So the vision is really the dreaming. It's, perhaps the vision would be, to have the safest local road system in the state of Idaho, perhaps. The doing is how we're going to achieve that vision. And then ultimately the goals, what oftentimes we focus on is getting into the nitty gritty in terms of the metrics, the numbers. Perhaps it's reducing the fatal crashes to 0 by 2030, or reducing the severe number of run off the road crashes by 50% by 2025. And even more specific, if you look at your users and the behavior piece, is increasing seatbelt usage by 20% for teen drivers. And the data that you guys have available to you allows you to set goals that are very, very similar to this as you look at moving safety forward in your communities. So let's talk a little bit more about the stakeholder piece. We've touched on this, Rosemarie has touched on it, I've touched on it as we got started, but these are just opportunities for us to engage stakeholders. I'm hoping that you are all champions. Again, you're on this webinar today, and I hope this is of great interest to you. But what are the next steps? Well, the next steps are really convening a working group and talking about what your goals might be, looking at the data, and ultimately working towards implementation of the plan and projects that are going to make a difference in your community. These are some examples. This is a specific example actually from Clackamas County, Oregon. It's just outside of Portland, Oregon. Clackamas County has been a leader in crossing the boundaries in terms of engineering and public health. They really have a strong partnership between public health and the engineering part of what they do. You can see the little graphic up on top there is safe roads, a vibrant community, and healthy people. That is what Clackamas County is driving forward. They haven't updated a plan in 2019. Their first plan was done in 2012. If you go to their website, they also have amazing resources on little video clips, public service announcements that they have on how to drive safely. And a lot of this has been done by Joe Merrick. He's a traffic engineer there, traffic safety engineer. and really has been a leader for their county in driving to zero in Clackamas County, a real nice example. Clackamas County does have both rural and urban roadways. So you might think of Portland as being very urban, which it is, but again, it does stretch into the rural components, which of course is also something that you guys have there in Idaho. So I grabbed actually again from your complete network policy in terms of how you guys are convening a working group and working together in terms of those that drive, those that are on bicycles, freight, pedestrians, public transportation. You guys are well on your way with the complete streets efforts that you've done. And really the hope is that additional agencies within Idaho, within the Compass region, would be able to basically take a lot of the work that has been done already and implement that at the local level. So there's a lot of resources that we have put on that local road safety plan do-it-yourself website. A lot of those are sample plans, just checking the time here, sample plans. There's actually a worksheet on how to develop a vision and mission and goals. And there's also a kickoff meeting, a draft agenda for a kickoff meeting for convening a working group to work on a local road safety plan. Again, these are downloads. I will show you exactly where those are on the website, but we've tried to make it easier for folks to jump in, grab some templates. There's prompting questions to help you through this process in an efficient manner. Let's jump back to the polling. I want to know who some of your stakeholders are, who you're working with. And even if you want to put in there stakeholders that perhaps you haven't been working with that you would like to, and you can put an asterisk perhaps by those that maybe you're not working with right now, but you would love to work with. I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint, go back to the polling. You guys are probably already ahead of me in the polling. Here we go. What sources? I'm sorry, jump back, folks. Oh, is it not in there? Hold on. There we go. There it is. Who are some of your stakeholders? So this is you're going to have to type the answers in here. So we'll take a moment for that to populate. It should show up as bubbles as we start getting into this. All right, there we go. Schools, Ada County Highway District, great. Police, kids, yes, kids are sponges. They often, it's amazing what goes through their minds in terms of how they're learning. It is a great opportunity to work with children in terms of safety, even those that are beginning to drive, other great opportunities. So transportation, all of us, thank you. Elected officials, neighborhood associations, families, developers, of course, emergency services, drivers. Let's see, faculty, great. So faculty maybe at a community college or a university or in the school district. Okay, someone mentioned school community members. Let's see, what are some of the other ones? So you can see there that Ada County Highway District is popping. It's bigger because a lot more people in this list have actually entered that, as well as public and schools and police. So this is outstanding. And these are also the responses to the polling questions. I'll provide that to Amy too, so you guys can see how the answers or how you guys answer these questions that we have in our poll. Local interest groups, great. There might be some advocates out there for bicycles or pedestrian or other elements that you have in your community. Thank you guys so much. This is great. I'm going to jump back to the slides. It'll still log if you guys, even though I'm going to jump out of it, I'm going to leave it open. So if you want to add anything in there, you can. Traffic engineers, thank you. Sometimes just because we're an engineer doesn't mean that you necessarily have safety in the forefront. I'll be honest, folks, I started out actually in construction and highway design, and I've come to safety over the years, and it really has changed my perspective on what I do as a designer. So appreciate whoever put that one in there. All right, I am going to jump out, but that will still stay live, or it should, as we go into this. All right, so step 2. Let's talk a little bit about the data element. So safety data is more than crash data. So let's think broader when we think about safety data. It's traffic volumes. We know that the higher the traffic volume, the more potential there is for conflict between vehicles or between users. Maintenance logs. If you've got that guardrail or that sign that repeatedly gets hit or knocked down, let's think about why that's happening. What is it? The location? Is it is it on a curve? Is it someone running a stop sign? What are the reasons why perhaps you've got these repeat locations from a maintenance perspective? Pavement edge drop off, where the gravel is peeled off away from the edge of the pavement. Sometimes we've got issues with that. That's all information that can help feed us in terms of where we might choose to invest first, or how we might choose to invest in safety. Road safety audits, law enforcement. There's probably a lot of, I'm not an officer of the law, but having those conversations about, sometimes there are tickets written, sometimes there's not, sometimes there might be a warning. But law enforcement oftentimes will know where some of the hot spots are. Where are they maybe deploying resources at certain times of the day because they know there's potential for higher risk? And having that conversation and then overlaying that, again, as you look at emphasis areas and priorities. The roadway itself speaks to us. Again, narrow 2-lane, if you've got 10-foot lanes versus 11-foot lanes, if you've got a paved shoulder versus a gravel shoulder, if you've got, again, a skewed intersection or a 5-legged intersection, how does that look differently when it comes to risk for your roadway network? Having a protected versus a permissive left turn at a signalized intersection. This is all information that we can utilize to really identify where we should start and where we can invest first. So it's more than the crashes. And the interesting thing is through the systemic safety analysis, we can invest at locations where there has not been a fatal or severe crash because of the risk factors that might be at that location. We want to prevent that next crash from happening. So it is looking at a combination of a reactive and a proactive approach to safety. So here's just some of those other, just reiterating what I just mentioned. Keep moving on here. All right, let's go back to our polling. So what sources of safety data are available to you? So remember, it's more than crashes. What safety data? I would love to hear about that. I'm jumping back. I'm going to need to go. There we go. So here I've got crash data reports, traffic violations, 911 calls, hospital data, maintenance records, and other. If you click other, you should be able to click on multiple things here. If you click on other, please put that in the chat pod in terms of what other safety data that you might be utilizing or you think that you might be able to utilize to help develop your plan. Crashes, the crash data, we always want to be looking at that. Absolutely. What are some of the other elements? And I'm guessing that you guys might not be able to click more than one based on what I'm seeing with the polling right here. So let's just go with, if you've already done one, maybe put in the chat pot some of the other ones that you're utilizing. I know in for PED and bike data and some of the road safety audits that I've conducted across the US is when we get into the areas where there may not necessarily be a report that has been filed in terms of a crash report, but 911 calls where a pedestrian or bike has been hit or crashed or a hit and run, maybe that didn't produce an injury. Sometimes that is a good source of information in terms of overlaying that data with your transit stops, with your marked crosswalks or your legal crossings that you have legal crosswalks. They don't all have to be marked. In addition to maybe speeding or traffic violations, as well as crash reports. Okay. All right, everyone. I apologize. I probably didn't click on, maybe we can come back to this one later and I can change that you can click on multiple items here. So let's jump back into the PowerPoint and let's talk a little bit more about that proactive approach to safety. So how healthy is your road system? So this analogy is really how healthy is your road system, taking what we do personally, going to the doctor's office. What are the things that they ask you? Usually now I have to fill out a form on my phone or my computer before I even get there to say, has anything changed since we saw you last? Are you exercising? All these questions that they're gonna ask. They're gonna ask about smoking and alcohol and drugs and all sorts of things. They're doing a risk assessment of you before you come into their office. And we can do that as well with our road network. So how healthy is your road system? We've already mentioned some of these in terms of the radii of curves. We've mentioned it in terms of the traffic volumes and how that might affect safety, intersections with a curve, severe crash within a curve. Again, these are all risk factors that we can utilize to be proactive in our approach to safety. There's a great video on the website. Again, the link is there. We'll put all these links into the chat pod so you guys have these. There is a video that was created on the Minnesota case study for their development of local road safety plans. They call them county road safety plans in Minnesota that Rosemarie referenced. And they have this systemic approach to safety on all their roads where they are looking at proactively looking at deploying countermeasures, doubling up stop signs, adding additional chevrons on curves and things of that nature. So really low cost countermeasures to prevent that next crash from happening. So these next few slides really are just talking about opportunities for you to look at your data, what we call the crash tree combination. So you might have split your data in terms of, if you look at, let's do Ada County. So we've got Ada County and we split it between state and local roads. And then we go rural and urban roads. And then we'll do segment and intersection. And then for intersection, you might look at stop controlled, signal controlled, yield controlled. But you create these trees to help us really drill down on where crashes are overrepresented on our system. And I've got an example I'll show in just a minute. Here's one right now. This is showing, this is on city roads, looking at basically fatal and injury crashes, where we've got 201 crashes. You can see there, this is looking at ped and bike. So you've got ped crashes, you've got bike crashes, and this is looking at non-intersection related and intersection related. So wow, did those intersection related crashes pop for pedestrians, right? So this is not some agencies you see more mid-block or mid-block pedestrian crashes versus intersection crashes. In this example, this is actually a city in Alabama that has more that are intersection related. You can look at that. There's more on the minor arterial. So 42% were occurring on a minor arterial during daylight, which is also having more daylight versus dark is not consistent with the national statistics that we have. So this is really important in how we can use the data to drill down. And the good thing is you guys have some great resources when it comes to data. These are just examples of potential risk factors for pedestrians. See transit stops, whether or not there's lighting, the number of lanes you're going to cross. When we look at the risk factors as examples, this comes from Washington. Rosemarie mentioned Washington State has a great program related to local road safety plans and city safety plans, where they looked at the number of risk factors that they included in their plans to help them make decisions about their projects. So this will be something that you can consider. So speed, the functional class of the roadway, whether or not there was a curve, the crashes that you guys had clicked on, the shoulder width, and whether or not there is lighting. So this is the point where I know we're getting close to the end and we're going to get into the Q&A session. But what I want to do is do the two demonstrations to talk a little bit more about that. So bear with me as I jump, and I have to move this down so I can see it. Here we go. So remember, this is the website. We've got the itd.idaho.gov/safety. Okay, so that's going to get us to this page. And right down here, click for Idaho crash data dashboards. If you go into that, what it does is it'll bring you into this new dashboard, newer dashboard, looking at all the crashes in Idaho. All right, so what we can do then, and this webinar is not intended to teach you how to use the tool, but it is pretty user-friendly, folks. you can add these filters. So I'm going to go in right now and I'm going to put in county. And I'm going to click on Ada just because that pops up first. And I can drill down into what's been happening in Ada County from let's see, we got from 2008 to 2022. So let's just say that I want to look at just the fatal and injury A crashes. Okay, so now what I've done is I've populated, again, just clicking on crash severity, I've populated, now we're just looking at A, so that's fatalities. K, which is fatalities, and A, which is serious injuries. So you can see the numbers there. But what I want to do is I don't want to go all the way back to 2008. So what if I put in here for date and time? Let's see. It's going to pop up here. Let me go back to this. Let's do 2021. Let's do 2020, 2019. And that's actually, I'm going to click off 2021. And we'll leave it in there. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll go the last 4 years. So you can very quickly look at your data from a certain time period. And I believe if you go in, it's actually going to give you a time period if you were to go in and click on this. I've got the data split by rural and urban. So let's say I just want to look at the urban data. So now I've drilled down just on the urban data. And let's say I just want to look at intersections. Okay, so now very quickly, I can start to look at some of these corridors. Here's corridors this corridor has several intersections. And I can drill all the way down into these crashes, folks. It's a great way for you to learn more about specific contributing factors and helps you then find emphasis areas and then ultimately prepare projects that are data driven. Okay, so that was just a quick demonstration, but if you have not had an opportunity to look at the dashboards on ITD's website, I highly encourage you to look at that with a little more information. There are, for example, Hunter from Compass, he's well-versed. He's able to support federal highways, ITD, are able to support efforts like this in terms of how you look at your crash data and having this really nice interface for us to drill down into this a little bit more in terms of having the visual that goes with the data. And last but not least, I'm going to pull up this local road safety plan do-it-yourself website. This is what I've been running through. I'm going to show you those proven safety, jump right to the proven safety countermeasures. If you actually look at, if I click on this here, it's going to bring up a bunch of informational and public service videos on roadway departure countermeasures. So for example, high friction surface treatment or rumble strips on roadways. This is a great one. This rumble strip video is a nice informational video on why rumble strips can save lives. If I jump back in, I can actually look at, there's several videos. If I were to click on this video, is local agency insights. So this is us interviewing state DOTs, counties, local officials, and having them give us information about their experience with developing and implementing local road safety plans and going through that process of using the data, choosing proven solutions, and ultimately implementing them in a plan. So I hope that you have an opportunity to look at the website. As I mentioned, those resources down here, if I click on local road safety plan templates, you'll see a template, you'll see vision and mission goals template and a meeting agenda. You've got stakeholders and you've got training. If I jump back to the main landing page, you're going to see that there's example plans. And we are doing a major refresh or update on this where we're going to have additional plans, example plans. And there's also local road safety plan sites from California, Indiana, Minnesota, North Dakota, Washington, and then a tribal safety plan website, tribalsafety.org, that has over 100 tribal safety plans for the tribes across the US. All right, folks, I'm going to jump back one more time to our slide deck. And I just want to highlight those proven safety countermeasures that we've talked a little bit about. Federal Highways did in the fall, we did actually come out with some new proven safety countermeasures, looking at speed safety cameras and variable speed limits, as well as highlighting bicycle lanes and looking at lighting, as well as the rectangular rapid flashing beacon, and then pavement friction management, which is high friction, looking at continuous high friction surface treatment. This is a great starting point in terms of looking at both, very low cost countermeasures as well as medium cost countermeasures in terms of improving the safety on your roadway. So this is just a snapshot. Again, you'll have a copy of the slide deck that goes into more detail on those proven safety countermeasures. But I want to jump back out and get to the last. Don't forget that NHTSA also, so National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, has a lot of good information on countermeasures that work. So countermeasures that work, that was published in 2020, but actually came out in 2021, where this is more of the education and the law enforcement strategies for getting to zero and reducing those fatal and injury crashes. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end at that, just so we have enough time for Q&A, because I see the Q&A is filling up there. Just looking at, I think we've got 19. So I'm gonna jump back out. I'm gonna stop sharing, and at the very end, let's see. I'm just gonna jump to that last slide because there's just additional resources here. I'm gonna land on this slide here. There's been a little bit of a quote that we've been using over the past probably 8 years. It's do what you can with what you have where you are. If we wait, I'm not, there's a lot of things I can't make a decision about, but I'm in control of what I can do and how I can help you all, how I can help other folks that I have an opportunity to work with. So it's really important to boil it down to what you can do with what your role is in your agency or in your community to make a difference for safety. So Amy, I'm going to jump out and then we'll facilitate our conversation here.
Great. Thank you, Hillary. First question is maybe less of a question, but more just asking for your thoughts or your comments on that bicyclists and pedestrians are often blamed when they are hit by a car. And the questioner was just looking for your thoughts on that situation.
Well, generally, I would say, and so I'm actually working with a local agency right now, or we are, I should say, Federal Highways in Colorado. It happens to be one of those smaller communities, about 12,000 population, and State Highway is kind of their main street for a portion of their community. And if you look at most of the fatal and injury crashes in that small community, many of them were ped and bike related. And many of the pedestrian crashes occurred in a crosswalk. And a few of the bicycle crashes did too. And so part of our investigation, if you will, as we're helping them develop their local road safety plan, is really finding out, more details. So we pulled up the crash reports. We're looking at the crash reports in terms of, was that pedestrian actually walking against the light, or what was going on in those particular crashes, like a left turner or a right turner? Was it a speed issue? Was it at night? And so to us, the important thing is that it is, we're working with facts, we're working with data, and to understand how a crash occurs, why a crash occurs, and then ultimately working with everyone involved. So that would be the community itself, it would be working with law enforcement, and it would be working with the community, so the pedestrians, the bicyclists, the people that are using that roadway network, to make sure that there is an understanding of what the laws are in terms of pedestrians having the right of way, or bicycles having their space on the roadway, being aware as a driver, but also making sure that we've got good signal timing. So leading pedestrian intervals is a great way for pedestrians to be more visible to cars. For example, on those right-hand turns or those left-hand turns, that can be an issue when it comes to pedestrian crossings. It's having reasonable pedestrian crossings in terms of the wait time, right? So having reasonable. So it's a combination of us having good infrastructure that works well for all users, as well as having a conversation with law enforcement and with automobiles that are, so really drivers in your community, transit operators, and the pedestrians and bicyclists, to make sure that we're using facts when we talk about the issues around pedestrian and bike safety. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you. Well, and several people did put in the chat types of data that they have access to, and people else, I won't read them back. But one person made a comment, kind of a comment question about safety data, about also including the money spent as the result of crashes and injuries. And that wasn't something that you had mentioned, and if you could address that a little bit more.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand that question. So the safety data based on the money spent. So that's the money spent for the countermeasure, or the money spent like in terms of societal costs with a crash or a death?
My understanding is societal costs. Oh, here it is. Doesn't say how. I'll see if he pops up. He did. Car repairs and medical costs.
Right.
Thank
So yeah. So yes, when we encourage through this process to look at what we might call for lack of a better term, the benefit cost analysis that looks at not only like the cost of putting in infrastructure, right? So let's say we're putting in a roundabout, right? So we're putting in a roundabout, and we are going to do a benefit cost. So let's just say that roundabout's going to go in, it's compared to a traffic signal. And what we want to do though is look at the signal versus the roundabout. So our alternative analysis, and then not just the construction cost, right? Not just the engineering and construction cost, but the life cycle cost of one treatment versus another. And look at maintenance costs, look at societal costs of a fatal crash or an injury. And through the process of doing a benefit cost analysis for countermeasures, we do have costs associated with property damage only crashes, which would be that maintenance costs, repairing a vehicle, and the various injuries, like an incapacitating injury versus someone that may have broke their arm or just has a scratch, all the way up to a societal cost of a death. And so that is incorporated into that process for determining the countermeasures that we would like to look at. But it's not just the cost of the solution itself. You need to look at that life cycle cost of that solution and take into account, if you have a roundabout versus a traffic signal, again, just talking basic high level here, we know that roundabouts reduce fatal and injury crashes between 70 and 90%. That is huge. And so that is taken into consideration as you compare that to other alternatives. And so just as you said, that benefit cost analysis is important as we look at our different countermeasures and considerations for our projects. Hopefully that was what you were looking for.
Yes, thank you. Got a response. Yes, it was. Thank you.
Oh, great.
Question, kind of lumping a couple of together that I received from people that maybe don't work for a government or a transportation agency, but are more a member of the public or a stakeholder group. You know, a lot of what you talked about, the road safety plans kind of starts with an agency and works out to the public. What can people do who are members of I'll broadly say the public, but a variety of different groups, and how can they be involved, especially early on in that process? Okay.
So first I want to acknowledge that Rosemarie is posting great resources in the chat pod right now. So keep your eye on that. In reference to, how you can be involved as someone in the community, whether it's you're a part of a group or you're representing yourself as a community member, it's, making sure that your community knows that you want to be involved in the process. If a process has been started, perhaps it's saying, hey, I'm interested, I'd love to sit on your working group, or, bringing your information to the table. If they have not started the process, it might be an opportunity for you to say, hey, Compass has this new complete streets, or complete network policy. They're referencing local road safety plans. They just did a webinar. I'd really like to know where our agency is with potentially developing a plan and or taking advantage of this future funding that is not but available now, but it's going to be available. So it's being proactive in terms of your interest in safety, and being proactive in terms of perhaps volunteering your time or really being a part of that process. And there's other ways you can do it in terms of, volunteering at the school, or taking this information yourself and helping to educate others in your community, because it really does take a community to make a difference when it comes to safety. So I appreciate your interest in that. That's very important. And secondly, volunteer. I mean, that's one of the great ways that we can contribute in our communities without it being our, job, so to speak.
Thank you. And another question, if you could talk a little bit about illumination for safety, and specifically using continuous lighting.
So, and I'm just writing these down as Amy tells them to me, so I can focus on the specific question. So we know that lighting that lighting is good in terms of for pedestrians, for bicyclists at conflict points, right? So we often talk about lighting up conflict points. So let's take the full gamut. It could be a curve, it could be an intersection, it could be a mid-block crossing, it could be perhaps ramp terminals as you're coming on and off of a ramp terminal. So we want to illuminate potential conflict points, and that can look very, very different. Your question was specific to continuous lighting, so I'm not sure if that was specific to an arterial or what type of facility that is on, but that's definitely something that is in our toolbox, is looking at point lighting and very targeted lighting in terms of a crossing or a conflict point, and then continuous lighting can look different in a suburban versus urban versus, I'll call it kind of like an interstate type application. And so we do know that lighting is good in terms of making conflict points visible, but at the same time, I understand that there's a limit in terms of making sure that we don't overdo it either. If there's dark skies, the type of lighting is super important. Whether you've got cutoff lighting, using LEDs, adaptive lighting that actually reacts to the vehicle or the pedestrian or the bicyclist coming along. There's an amazing video from the Lummi Nation in Washington State looking at adaptive lighting on a separated pathway for peds and bikes in a rural tribal nation. So lighting is very broad in terms of how we can design it. But generally speaking, we do know that it is very valuable in terms of lighting up conflict points, particularly when it comes to peds and bikes. And Rosemarie, if you could find that Lummi Nation video link and post that's a great one.
And then another question about roundabouts versus signalized intersections. Roundabouts are often viewed unfavorably by the general public due to a lack of awareness or experience. Do you have any insights on both the education and implementation that works for all stakeholders?
Great. So well-designed roundabouts really are a game changer for rural, suburban, and urban intersections. If your roundabout or a roundabout is designed well, it has the opportunity to be very efficient 24 hours a day and be safe 24 hours a day. In terms of it being unfavorable, that is not unique to for an area Idaho. Is something that is challenging across the country, depending on where you are. And so again, sticking to the facts, sticking to what we know from a safety perspective, from an efficiency perspective, when it comes to all users, the difference between a roundabout, again, not just during the peak period, but during off-peak periods, and what that presents to the corridor, the community, the intersection. And that's sometimes people are just not gonna like what they don't like. And that's, but facts and using education and public service announcements is great. Every September, there is a National Roundabouts Week, if you can believe it. If you look up #Roundabouts Week, you will see some amazing public service announcements when it comes to roundabouts, educational, testimonials from law enforcement and emergency services. There's an example there's one state trooper in Washington State, there's one in Colorado that posts during National Roundabouts Week. The EMS in Hilliard, Ohio has posted and said, we have never used the jaws of life at a roundabout, ever. And so it is a process, if you will. Anything that's new can make us uncomfortable, but being factual and sometimes doing education when it is not a part of a project can be beneficial. So it's proactive versus it being associated with an actual project that then oftentimes there's more emotion when it's oftentimes attached to a specific project versus being general and doing some of that education and being factual in advance. I know I had an opportunity to be in Spokane a few years ago and sat in, did some education over there on roundabouts. And again, I think it's very important to know. I've got my top 10, my top 5, what you need to know about a roundabout. If you want more resources than that, please let us know. We can work with Lance Johnson with our Federal Highways Division office there in Idaho and make sure we can get some of those resources to you.
All right, thank you.
Don't be discouraged. I have to say, Amy, don't be discouraged. I spend 50% of my work life in roundabouts, and I have a mom who does not like roundabouts. So I get it. And so just don't be discouraged. We have to be resilient, if you will.
Thank you. And that was the last question that we had posted. I will just provide one additional opportunity if anybody has any last questions. I'll keep my eye on that chat and one just popped up, just one second. More just a comment about roundabouts, that some people are more confused when there are multiple lanes or there's something tall in the center that blocks the view. And that some drivers seem to think the outside lane is meant to be empty to allow for on-ramping. In other words, it seems more people ignore the yield signs in multi-lane scenarios. So yeah, single lane roundabouts are definitely different than multi-lane roundabouts. There's more conflict points in multi-lane roundabouts. Lane discipline can be a challenge. Like you mentioned, some people crisscross through the lanes. We're meant to stay in our lane, choose the appropriate lane on the approach. We have seen some agencies reinforce at the yield signs with regulatory black on white signs that say yield to both lanes. So to both lanes is then hopefully reinforcing, and then doubling up the yield sign. So one on the right and one on the left. The one on the right you have to have, but then reinforcing with the one on the left. So that's a supplementary yield sign, but then to both lanes. The other way some agencies are, education is one. We've got a great example in Ohio where they've done significant education. They've got these multi-lane roundabouts near 4 schools, elementary all the way through high school. We've got new families and kids coming through there as they cycle through the schools. Is really that education piece and working with law enforcement to help them do the education, get into the schools, have those conversations. So utilizing opportunities for education. The other piece is some agencies are actually enhancing their pavement markings. So it's more pronounced, hopefully, to again try to encourage people to stay in their lane.
having good signing and marking, because if you're in an area, I looked at your weather for today. I know you guys, some of you might be expecting snow. We got 7 inches yesterday morning that we were totally not expected to get. But it's important that, you know, you reinforce them with signs, because when you can't see, either the white marking is word off or there's snow, we have to make sure that drivers have that information through signing to stay in their lane and encourage that piece.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
So just a couple of housekeeping things before we wrap up. It is almost 10:30. First, Hillary and Rosemarie, I want to thank both of you for your time today, and thank you to everyone for participating. As I mentioned before, in just a moment, we'll wrap up our formal session. But for those of you that would like to stay on, Hillary and Rosemarie have agreed to stay on the line with us for an extra 30 minutes for an in-depth discussion. Once we completely wrap up the formal portion of the presentation, I will unmute everyone so we can have a little bit more of a discussion with that smaller group. We will be posting both the YouTube video and the slide deck shortly on the Compass website. Once both are posted, I will send out links to both. As we mentioned, a lot of the links that Rosemarie put in the chat are from the slide deck, which will be on our website. But there were also several that kind of came up spur of the moment. So I did make a list of all of those links just to make sure that we don't miss any. And I will put that in the email as well so that we don't miss any of the ones that weren't in the original slide deck. In that same email from me, you'll also receive an evaluation. And I would greatly appreciate it if you fill it out and send it back. We do use those and read them in detail to help us improve our education series. So your feedback on those evaluation forms is very important to us and really does help us. So with that, I will say thank you for everyone who attended. I hope to see you all at our next installment of our Compass Education Series. I'll give just a moment for people that need to drop off, and then I will unmute for those of you that want to stay on for a longer, more informal session here at the end. So thank you, everyone.